I want to start out of the gate today talking to my home sellers and homeowners that have rental properties. It's kind of a niche market, but it's something we've run into a lot recently. There are plenty of landlords out there looking to liquidate homes that they own, whether they're large institutional landlords or whether it's an individual that owns, several properties. And, we run into it quite often where we're used to giving, home selling tips to people selling their own home or selling a home they moved from that's vacant. And it's a completely different scenario when you're selling a rental property. And I want to separate this out to a couple of different segments or niches in rental property and start first with just renting out a single family or a townhome property. You've got it rented and you want to exit it. You want to sell it. And there are typically a few different audiences of people that you can sell that property to. The first audience of people are people that would also keep it as a rental. And when you're selling it to someone that's going to keep it as a rental, and that's the highest and best use of it. So the highest and best use of a property being sold on the market that has a tenant in it is typically going to be one that's getting very good cash flow, like a great return on investment compared to what someone would get parking it somewhere safe, whether it's a mutual fund or a savings bond or savings account. It needs to be getting a better return than that on the cash flow. And it probably is going to be a house that maybe needs work that you don't want to put money into. So you can sell a property that's rented out with a tenant in it. However, most of the time, I would say 90+% of the time, it backfires and you should sell the property without the tenant in it because you can apply the property to a greater audience. And I want to break this down for you because when you're selling real estate that is tenant occupied, whether it is, single family, townhome, condo, duplex, whatever it is, the more likely that someone is going to be an institutional investor or somebody that's looking for cash flow is going to be somebody buying something that is multifamily. The owner that wants to buy, and what I mean by that is a, duplex, triplex, quadplex, apartment building. Those are properties that successfully can sell with tenants in them because the person buying it, the high probability of the person buying is that they're not going to live in it. The highest and best use is as a rental. It's not easy to turn around and fix up and resell for a profit. And it's a numbers game. It's a business decision. So those properties can be occupied by tenants and sold with tenants in them. When you're selling a property that is occupied by a tenant, where the largest portion of the buying audience is going to be someone that would move into it, which is pretty much in Tampa with the number of people moving here, almost every other type of other situation. If you are selling it with a tenant in it and you want to get the most amount of money, first off, you can't control the experience. The one thing I've learned through 22 years of selling real estate is to the majority of home buyers, they are not buying the math. They're not buying the investment choice. They're not buying like 4 walls and some dirt. They're buying an experience. They're buying emotion. They're buying for their family. If the majority of the buyers for that comparable property, maybe the one that sold next door or the one that sold across the street, the majority of them are people that are going to buy it and move into it. Keeping a tenant in it while you sell it often backfires. And here's why. Because that tenant is not going to keep up the property like an owner will. That tenant is going to put restrictions on the showings. They're going to not pick up after themselves. The experience of seeing that home is not going to be a positive one. The tenant doesn't have a vested interest in the sale of the property. So are they going to make the bed? Are they going to have it smelling nice? Are they going to change the AC filters when the AC filters need to be changed? Tenants notoriously are not going to take care of the property like a homeowner will. I am an opponent of people selling properties unless they're multifamily driven or unless the market segment really says that this is a rental property. Like maybe it's in a vacation part of Tampa. Maybe it's on the beach. Maybe it's likely an Airbnb. In those situations, it's about the math. When it's not about the math to an investor, it's about the emotion to a homeowner. And you can't sell the emotion or the experience when the tenant lives there or the tenant follows around the showings or the tenant doesn't pick up after their dog or the tenant makes it hard to show the property. So consumers today have this high expectation about experience and service. They press a button on Amazon and they want something to show up within hours. They want magic. Click button, magic happen. As a homeowner that lives in the property, or even as one that has a vacant property, you can provide that experience because if someone contacts an agent or contacts a listing broker and wants to see it, that can generally be done relatively quickly. In a tenant situation, you're oftentimes dealing with the schedule of the tenant, their children, their animals, their own schedule, whether that they even call you back because you want to see it. And then typically there's going to be laws that say you have to provide so much notice per the terms of the lease in order to get into the property. So for example, so many homeowners that have this instantaneous expectation of a response that, call up the agent or they drive by that day and they want to see it that day aren't going to get to see it. You're escorting those people down to your competition to the house down the street to buy it because they might be impulsive. They might be the perfect buyer ready to buy that house. They love the neighborhood. They love what it looks like from the street. They love the photos that you probably took and edited when the tenant wasn't laying all over the couch with stuff, strung out everywhere. They're your perfect buyer and you lost them. You missed them because you couldn't accommodate them because there's a law in place that says you have to honor the tenants required for privacy. You can only get in within a certain time frame, typically 24 hours. Some leases are shorter, but the standard kind of basis is typically a 1-day notice. So you're not only limiting exposure, but you're limiting the emotional experience in that home. Because when the consumer walks in to see that house, and maybe it does look good in the pictures, maybe you did do a good job of getting it cleaned up and making sure the tenant had it looking great for pictures, but you can't be there every step of the way, nor can your realtor be there to clean up. That's not their job. They're not house cleaners or house sitters. So when the door gets opened and you've got a tenant living in the property, there's a high probability that buyer entering that home is going to be let down. They're not going to have an experience that meets what they expect, and they're going to be disappointed in the product. They're not going to fall in love with it. They're not going to stay in it very long because the tenant's going to maybe still be there, maybe, sitting outside on the porch, maybe walking around following them. It's just not an experience that helps sell a property. So if you're selling a tenant occupied property, you have to understand to offset those things, you're going to have to sell it at a discount. If you want top dollar for the property, my recommendation, and a lot of people look at this in a very cheap way, but they look at this and they say, well, I don't want the vacancy. And let's say you're renting it for $2,000 a month. Well, I don't want, $4,000 or $6,000 a month to lose while I'm selling the property to get it vacated and cleaned up and make that access easier. And what I can promise you through 22 years is the majority of the people that think like that they don't want to lose their $4,000 to $6,000 are losing way more than that in the value and the price that they get for the home by a subpar experience and a tenant that isn't going to accommodate people, and people are going to go down the street and buy the other house. It's my strongest recommendation that if you are going to sell a property with a tenant in it, you better price it very aggressively. You better understand that you're going to not get market value, that you're going to get lowballed because the experience isn't going to be good, and you're going to shrink the buyer audience dramatically because the number of buyers that can and are willing to buy that house with that experience being presented shrinks dramatically. So what I propose, first step, number one, if you own a tenant occupied property and you're going to sell it, do everything you can to vacate the tenant. Wait till the lease is up, give them notice, negotiate them leaving, negotiate something so that the home can be vacant so you have a chance to clean it up a little bit and control the environment, and more importantly, control access to the property. Because a tenant, I promise you, no matter what you have in that lease, no matter what commitment they gave you, statistical probabilities over 22 years tell me that the tenant is not going to honor every part of what they've told you they will do when the home goes on the market. And it's going to cost you more money than the money that you will lose in the monthly rent. Let's just talk about the average in Tampa. The average home in Tampa is $500,000. A 1% or a 2 percentage point change in that price, and it'll probably be bigger than that, is more than the 3 months of rent that you'd lose. You're losing equity for convenience and cash flow. If you're going to sell it, exit it the best way. Do what you can to get the tenant out, clean the property up, put it on the market, and you will make more money selling the property than the rent that you think you're going to lose for a few months while it goes on the market. If you're dead set on renting it with the tenant in it, you're not going to give up the cash flow and you think I'm wrong, then go to option number 2. Option number 2, if you're selling a property with a tenant occupying, is incentivize the tenant. Offer them a financial incentive to modify the lease to allow for shorter notice showings, to agree to allow for shorter than 24 hours in writing. Give them a financial incentive that if they don't turn down any showings each month, they get some sort of extra incentive to help with the sale of the property, and maybe even a small bonus once the property sells, because then you're encouraging them to make sure to keep the property up and be a partner with you in working to help the property sell. If you don't do those things, I promise you, Some of the worst horror stories we have in selling real estate and dealing with properties on the market are when they're occupied by tenants. If you don't set up a mutually beneficial relationship for that tenant to help you, because they're boots on the ground of the home, of the asset that you're trying to sell. If you don't set up something mutually beneficial, and I promise you, your lease probably doesn't have anything like this. And whatever promise you get from them isn't worth its weight. You need something in writing, you need a conversation, and you need to incentivize them. If you do that, then you might have a chance at having your cake and eating it too by keeping the cash flow and getting a better price. But my strongest opinion is when you're selling tenant-occupied property is to get the tenants out, especially if the largest portion of the buyer audience for the property is going to be a likely person that moves in. There are rare circumstances, like I mentioned, where you can sell with the tenant. And those are like the multifamily scenarios, the Airbnb scenarios, the properties that are, kind of close to the beach where people have vision. But the majority of the time, that's not the case. And I've seen it backfire so many times where someone has a great property and they didn't want to lose $5,000 to get the tenant out and clean the property up, and it cost them 30 or 40 or 50. So don't make that mistake. If you're selling tenant-occupied property, do what you can. Get the person out, clean the property up, control the environment. Have the ability to control when people can see it, the responsiveness of when people can see it, and then the experience they have when they go in the home. Even if you don't make massive upgrades, but the access is easy. Some consumers will have vision to look past the repairs. They also will have a chance to fall in love with the house because they're going to stay in it longer, and the longer they stay in it, the greater the chance of them buying it. But a tenant-occupied property beats down all of those things. So again, get the tenant out or offer an incentive structure to allow the tenant to be a partner in the sale of the property with you.